Resident Evil 4 first released in 2005 and since has had millions of different ports and versions. The game was released to great success from critics and players alike and was easily the best-selling Resident Evil game of the time. In my quest to possibly play every Resident Evil game, still not sure if I'm going to do these guys yet, I finally gotten around to a classic game that many consider the best in the series and many also consider one of the best games of all time. Now maybe for some people part of that may be nostalgia, but part of it was also because this game was just so ahead of its time in 2005. Seriously, I can't tell you how many times I had to do a double take when checking this game's release date. It looks amazing. 2005 was an absolute banger of a year for video games, and yet Resident Evil 4 is easily one of, if not the best looking game visually amongst the crowd. Man, remember when we used to get great game after great game every single year back then? But regardless, my timing for trying out the original Resident Evil 4 couldn't be more perfect, as the remake was just announced not too long ago and is releasing in March. I'm very excited that I now get to be one of those people who points out all the familiar sights and characters and see all the changes that will be made for the remake. If you guys want me to play and make a video on that when it comes out, let me know in the comments. But it's time we get into one of Resident Evil 4's most impressive strengths with its overall presentation. In case I haven't said it enough already, Resident Evil 4 is from 2005. 2005. No, I don't think you understand. 2005. Granted, keep in mind I am playing the HD version on PC in 1440p resolution, but my goodness, what a beautiful game. Usually when I play old games like this, it's a very frustrating process. A lot of them require some maintenance to get them running properly, and then the graphics look really outdated and washed out. And while it's never something that particularly bothered me, if a game has old graphics, it won't ruin the experience for me. But when a game like Resident Evil 4 is out here with some still fantastic looking graphics, especially for the time, all it does is just enhance the overall experience. It was also super easy to get up and running on PC. All I had to do was change around a few settings, no mods or fixes required at all. I am aware this new PC port did come out a bit later and that the original port was quite bad, but it still looks great, and I'm gonna shut up about it now before you get tired of me saying how good it looks. Psych! This game's cutscenes are another thing that continues to blow my mind with its age. Most games from 2005 and before don't even use motion capture in their cutscenes, and Resident Evil 4 uses it to perfection. That was a huge leap in the Resident Evil series that always had those robotic looking animations, whilst in Resident Evil 4 the characters feel alive and realistic. This game's visuals really allowed the voice actors' performances to shine, and that they do. Granted, there's still the cheesy one-liner and goofy dialogue here and there.
No thanks, bro.
But honestly, that was part of the fun of the game for me. Resident Evil is famous for its cheesy dialogue and one-liners. It's even in the newer games.
Playtime.
And it's one of those things that sounds so ridiculous that it makes for some great funny moments. Then there are some other one-liners, mainly from Leon, that are just straight up badass and iconic.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
All that stuff has a certain charm to it and is what makes some of the cutscenes so memorable. But the game is more serious and emotional when it needs to be and strikes a nice balance. And of course, how could I ever forget the Merchant, one of video game's most iconic characters, who many people who haven't even touched Resident Evil before would know. The Duke from Resident Evil Village also was clearly inspired by the Merchant and even quotes one of his famous lines.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
What are you buying?
It's also impossible to play throughout this game without trying to imitate or say, "What are you buying?" at least once. It's just such a fun, unique character, and I love how mysterious he is. There's never even really a cutscene of Leon acknowledging the guy's existence, so who knows if he's even really there. Also, fun fact, Leon and the Merchant are both voiced by the same guy, which I thought was awesome and makes me very concerned about who's voicing the Merchant in the remake, because who could possibly fill the shoes of this iconic iconic voice. I mean, who knows, maybe they'll get Paul Mercier to reprise his role, but I doubt it since he's not voicing Leon in the remake. I'll touch more on the merchant and his shop later, but the character adds to this game in its charm in so many ways. And oh man, I haven't even talked about the soundtrack, which can be summed up in one word: masterpiece. The music from start to end is so memorable, and for some games I don't even notice or pay attention to the soundtrack, but there's a select few where I constantly go out of my way to notice and acknowledge it, and Resident Evil 4 is one of those games. It has so much range. It can feel intense, heart-pounding action music, to eerie, creepy, to straight horror. I love it especially when you're being swarmed by large hordes of enemies. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to music, but I know a godly soundtrack when I hear one, and it's an essential factor of any classic game. The sound design is also incredible. Some of the sound effects the enemy types make sends chills down my spine. Whether it's the yelling of the Ganados, the creepy whispers of the monks in the castle, or the horrifying sounds of the regenerators. Each enemy type has its own distinct sound effect to the point where you can literally recognize which enemy is nearby based on sound alone, which is amazing sound design. Not many games these days do that. Oh man, and the satisfying sounds whenever you blow an enemy's head off or go into a reload animation. It just feels so good to do such basic things in this game. Now, the controls were something I was a little worried about when heading into the game because it's such an old game, and while it definitely took some getting used to, especially with the movement, once I got used to it, it was very satisfying and I hardly paid any mind to it. I played on keyboard and mouse, which worked quite well for everything except the quick times, which I'll talk about more later, but let's just say having X and C as keybinds for quick times was difficult for me, and there's no option to change them. If you are going to play this on PC, I consider trying the game out with a controller and getting a feel for which feels more comfortable for you. I chose keyboard and mouse despite the awkward keybinds because I hate aiming with a controller, but that's just me. But generally, presentation is always one of the most concerning factors for many people when going to play an old game, and Resident Evil 4 more than excels at it. The game's presentation, graphics, sound design, soundtrack, cutscenes, it's all aged incredibly well and is a clear example of how ahead of its time it was. Resident Evil 4 feels like one massive grand adventure. From the moment Leon is driven into the village, he's lunging headfirst into danger. Starting off in the iconic Ganado village where he's attacked by swarms and swarms of Ganados, making his way through farms and forest trails, then reaching the creepy church, going across a lake, fighting his way through Salazar's castle, battling the insects in the sewer, and finally making it to the massive industrial island. Each area is drastically distinct from one another and provides so much variety to the game. Each new area has different enemy types specific to that region, along with a different aesthetic and tone. The opening area in the village is definitely the most known and recognizable with Resident Evil 4, from its creepy, rundown rural design to the tremendous amount of detail, which again is very impressive considering the game's age. There's just something very off-putting and eerie from the village and woods from the get-go that keeps you engaged and in suspense. Then the game decides to throw you right into the mix of it as you fight off a whole village worth of Ganados and the chainsaw guy, which, oh boy, do I have more to say about them later, but it's such an intense and captivating opening that gives you just a small taste of what's to come. Not to mention it includes one of Leon's most famous quotes.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
And like I said, each area feels very different while still being consistently great in both atmosphere and detail. Salazar's castle is massive and intricate with lots of gold and rich furniture and decor. You deal with the creepy whispering monks who charge you relentlessly. Then there's the island lab area, which has a completely different look with new enemy types geared with military weaponry and armor, and have you going through small confined corridors and hallways dealing with the horrors from Sadler's experiments. This game may have a lot of of focus on cool, fast-paced action, but there's plenty of horror elements and suspense buildup, and it's in large part due to the aesthetics and designs of the game's world. Personally, what made this game so scary for me was the pure intensity of having swarms of enemies thrown at you all at once. Whereas in Resident Evil 2, the scariest part for me was the stalker enemy types like Mr. X.
And get away, man, get away! Just leave me alone!
This game makes every enemy type terrifying. The Ganados alone were so versatile and had so many different forms that always keep you on edge and guarantee you never take the simplest enemy lightly. Most of the levels in this game are quite confined, leaving you with very small amounts of maneuverability, especially with waves of enemies closing in on you. It keeps you immersed and engaged within the game's world. Like most Resident Evil games, it's not like an open world, it is quite linear, but provides ample opportunity for exploration in which you're rewarded and incentivized to do so. I love that by checking all the nooks and crannies, backtracking, and checking the occasional extra room, I'm rewarded with loot and money. It makes exploration not only feel encouraged, but extremely satisfying, providing you with some extra loot to deal with the horrors that await you. I like how the loot is also positioned regularly in barrels and boxes, so after a little while you know exactly where to check and what to break for loot. Again, really smart game design. There's also quite a lot of valuables and treasures hidden around the level, which again you're encouraged to search for as you can sell them for a very nice profit. You can even buy a treasure map from the merchant to see all their locations. The merchant and save areas feel like they've mostly been positioned in the perfect places when you're starting to run low on supplies and resources and need to restock. I say mostly because I find it odd that they'll give you a save area right after a chapter ended because you just saved with the chapter ending, so I thought that was a bit odd. But regardless, for the most part, the merchant is always right around the corner when you need him most. You also gain access to the shooting range once you've progressed far enough in the game, where you can participate in multiple game types and earn bottle caps that can be used to earn some extra peseta, the currency of the game. The game also has numerous puzzles scattered throughout that aren't too challenging, but some are still challenging enough to give you a satisfying feeling whenever you complete them. The environments and locations of Resident Evil 4 have some fantastic level design and variety, making Resident Evil 4 feel like one grand, thrilling adventure. It's finally time to talk about the gameplay. The gameplay loop in Resident Evil 4 in general is incredibly satisfying and addictive. The gunplay can be a bit challenging and has a bit of a learning curve to adjust to at first, especially if you're used to the newer Resident Evil games like me, but that's what makes Resident Evil 4's gunplay so good. Learning to master it and knowing where and when to shoot an enemy. I love how you can shoot the enemies in different limbs or areas to create different results. For example, shooting a Ganado in the leg or kneecap will cause it to fall or drop to its knees, making it a more steady and easy target to kill. You can shoot dynamite or torches out of their hands to blow them up or set them on fire. It's such a rewarding feeling when you effectively take down enemies using your own strategy. You can stun enemies with a headshot and then kick them, or break out from their grasp with a super powered Leon kick. Leon's crazy athletic and strong in this game. And maybe blowing a Ganado's head off with a kick is unrealistic, but it looks awesome, so who cares? Resident Evil isn't super grounded and realistic to begin with. At first, I was iffy about only using a laser to aim and shoot enemies as opposed to a crosshair, but I grew to love that choice over the game, and I really hope that's something they keep for the remake. Not only does it feel more immersive using an in-game laser as opposed to a magic crosshair HUD, but it can also make the gunplay more challenging with the weapon sway and erratic, unpredictable movement of the enemies. All the weapons are very satisfying to use, and there's a massive amount of variety in different types of weapons you can use. Using a rifle to land an instant headshot kill, or the shotgun to send enemies flying back from close range, is so unbelievably satisfying. The amount of unique and distinct weapons you can use in this game is massive. Paired with the incredible upgrade and progression system with the merchant makes it that much better. The progression in this game just feels so good, getting stronger stronger, more powerful weapons as you progress, and upgrading them to be 10 times better. If you play your cards right, you can easily 1 or 2 shot enemies with your pistol by the end of the game. And I forgot to mention, there's like several different types of pistols, shotguns, rifles, and revolvers throughout the game, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and you'll often be forced to think about what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of to make space for fancy new weapons. There's even a rocket launcher and magnum which you can save for the tougher bosses and enemies. Which brings me to my next topic, inventory management. Yes, Resident Evil in every game I've played so far has a big emphasis on inventory management, and not only that, but it actually makes it fun. I love how it forces you to think and plan on how you're going to organize your inventory and what weapons you absolutely need. Sure, Leon can be absolutely strapped with weapons, but you still can't have every weapon in the game at once. That's not even including all the different attachments you can loot or buy to equip for your weapons that actually take up inventory space even when they're equipped. Of course, there's the herbs you can loot and combine to heal yourself, with red restoring your full health, green restoring a moderate amount of health, and yellow extending your max health, and they need to be combined to actually work and be effective. Really, the only thing I don't like about the inventory, and this is a product of the game's age, is that you have to open it up to equip different weapons and tools every time you want to switch, rather than what we're used to nowadays where you can easily just hot swap weapons on the go without pausing. It does take you out of it a bit, but I'll admit it was also kind of nice whenever I'm in a heated encounter to pause and take a minute to plan out what to do and what weapon to switch to, so it's kind of a double-edged sword in that respect. The movement in this game is another thing that took me a while to get a handle on, and is probably where the game shows its age the most in gameplay. Not being able to move while aiming and shooting is the big thing, but surprisingly, I actually quite liked that you can't move while shooting. It makes it quite challenging trying to figure out when to move and run away, and when to stop and shoot. It's also what makes encountering those swarms of enemies so intense, especially if you're surrounded by both sides where you have to watch your back, because the enemies in this game can really sneak up on you. The movement can also feel a little slow and clunky at times, especially on a keyboard and mouse, since you can't control your movement with the mouse, but strictly with WASD. Like I said, it really isn't too bad, and it didn't take me long to adjust to it. Using the quick turn in this game is very useful since the camera movement can be quite slow. But yeah, overall, the movement, it takes a while to get used to, but it's not too bad. Now let's get into what I consider one of Resident Evil 4's largest strengths when it comes to gameplay, the enemy types. RE4 is chock full of different varying enemies that constantly keep the experience fresh, intense, and challenging. At first, you're just dealing with the Ganados, which are a menace on their own, and with Resident Evil 4's dynamic difficulty, they become increasingly stronger and tankier the more you kill them. The health pools on these guys are so inconsistent that it always keeps you on your toes. Some take one pistol headshot to kill, while others you have to nearly empty a whole mag into. Then as you progress in the game, some of them have the Las Plagas parasite burst out of their head and start attacking you, making the Ganados far more difficult to kill and a lot more scary. Las Plagas does a ton of damage to you at close range, and when you're dealing with a large horde, they become really annoying to deal with, in a good way of course. Then of course there's also the chainsaw wielding Ganados, which are absolutely terrifying as they run at you with that scary sounding chainsaw and kill you in one hit if they get close. And of course they have a much larger health pool than any regular Ganado, and if they get a kill on you, man, it's brutal. You always got to keep an eye out for those guys, and whenever you hear that chainsaw revving, start running and look for a good spot to kill them from a safe distance. Then there are the monks from the castle who act a bit similar to the Ganados, but have different variants, weaponry, and designs. The monks themselves have multiple versions. Some have bulletproof helmets, some have shields, others have maces or scythes they can chuck at your head. Others are ranged and have crossbows. There's so much variety there alone. They also have very creepy sound effects like I mentioned earlier, and when they start running at you in swarms, they can be very hard to deal with. There's also lots of Garradors in the castle that have these massive Wolverine claws that can shred you from close range. These guys rely entirely on sound and are blind, so they only know where you are if you run or shoot, but they are extremely fast once they know your location. You also can only kill them by hitting them in the weak spot on their back. They can be very tough to kill if you don't understand how they operate and their weaknesses. The Commandos are the more advanced enemies who inhabit the island and have all sorts of different weaponry. Some are more like the traditional enemies enemies we're used to with bows or unique armor. Some are much bigger and have spiked armor with maces and axes. Some have actual miniguns they start firing at you. The regenerators, which I mentioned earlier, are these experimental bioweapons that are very durable and scary, with the best way to kill them is using a thermal scope on your rifle and shooting the parasites on its body. There's also these colmios? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce these, which are essentially wolves infected by the Las Plagas, and the novistadors, which are insects that can turn invisible. Yeah, fun stuff. Unlike some of the other games in the series, I think the enemies are actually worth killing in this game because they can drop a lot of decent loot and pesetas you can use at the merchant. The sheer amount of variety and differences between all the enemies was one of the best parts about this game for me, and that's not even including the numerous boss fights. Like the enemies, there's quite a lot of variety in bosses. There's the Del Lago boss where you have to use a harpoon and boat like it's Assassin's Creed Black Flag. There's the El Gigante. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering these names, but there's a lot of those boss fights as well, which were probably my least favorite of the game. Not that they were bad, but you have to fight them quite a lot and it's a bit repetitive. The Verdugo was horrifying and really challenging to fight. You're better off just running from that one. But there's some other great bosses as well that I don't want to spoil just in case some of you watching are planning on playing this game for the first time. But there's good variety in there aside from El Gigante. Oh man. And a lot of the bosses look great stylistically as well. Each boss has its own weak points and strategies for taking it down that you have to learn and adapt to on the fly, which I really enjoy. I've really liked the boss fights in all the Resident Evil games I've played so far. And while we're on topic, a lot of these boss fights include some form of quick time events, and in fact, Resident Evil 4 probably has some of the best use of QTEs I've seen in this type of game. A lot of them will happen in a split second during the cutscene, so you always have to be prepared or this will happen. Leon has so many unique death animations in this game, it's crazy. The thing that sucked about the QTEs for me though was because I played on mouse and keyboard. A lot of the QTEs used X and C as button prompts, which are hard keys for me to move over and hit in a split second, especially during a boss fight where I'm moving around and shooting. I died a lot during QTEs and had to restart whole sections, so that was really frustrating and a huge drawback to using a mouse and keyboard. If it only allowed me to change the keybinds for it, it would have been much better.
Yeah, let's see what you got. Come on. Are you serious? Oh, come on. Come on. Yes, finally got it. Let's go. Oh, what? Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. No!
And finally, a main component of Resident Evil 4 that I haven't even touched on yet is Ashley Graham. A large majority of RE4 is focused on escorting Ashley out of this godforsaken region, and you as a player actually have to protect and save her. Now, I was going into this game expecting to hate the parts where you must escort Ashley, since I've seen a lot of people complain about it, but I was pleasantly surprised. She was not bad at all. In fact, Ashley's AI was very well done. She always did what I ordered her to, and whenever the fighting would start breaking out, she'd stand behind me or duck out of my way so I could shoot enemies. I also liked how it was another strategic element deciding if you should have Ashley hide, follow you, or have her wait in a safe area. Granted, hearing Leon! Help me, Leon! Leon! Help me, Leon! Yeah, hearing that every few seconds was quite annoying, but gameplay-wise, she wasn't much of a nuisance at all. In fact, there were times where I forgot she was even there, and you can easily heal her or shoot her kidnapper if she gets picked up and taken away. So I was quite pleasantly surprised at how good and obedient the AI was. And while I did get her killed a few times, of course, it was nowhere near as bad as some people made it seem. Also, the section where you play as her isn't that bad at all either. In fact, it's actually pretty scary. So generally, Resident Evil 4's gameplay is still fantastic and has aged very, very well. And nearly everything about it, from the gunplay to all the different weapons, enemy types, and progression, is satisfying. Finally, we can get around to talking about the story. Now, I'm going to give a spoiler warning here for those who have not played this game yet and plan to in the future. If you wish to avoid spoilers, the video is in chapters, so just skip past this part. If you've played the game already or don't care about spoilers, let's talk about the story. Resident Evil 4 takes place 6 years after the events that happened in Raccoon City during Resident Evil 2. Leon Kennedy, now a special agent under employ of the president, has undergone some major character development during those 6 years as he's matured significantly and transformed into a total badass since his first day on the job as a cop for the RPD. Leon is sent to a rural village in Spain by the president to locate his missing daughter Ashley. However, just like all of these games, everything goes completely off the rails as Leon encounters a village infected by a parasite known as the Las Plagas. Leon, who felt very young and naive in Resident Evil 2, almost felt like a different character to me in Resident Evil 4. He's a man who no longer fears the danger. He's seen and been through so much since Raccoon City, and that shows in his more mature, stoic persona in Resident Evil 4. I think having Paul Mercier voice Leon with that deeper, matured voice also really helps sell the transformation and development of the character. Although, don't worry, Leon still loves his cheesy one-liner.
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
He's still occasionally pretty dumb and clueless as well, but those are trademarks of Resident Evil protagonists. However, Leon's not the only player in town. There's the mysterious researcher and former cop, Luis Serra. Is it Luis or Louis? See, Leon says Louis. But I think that's just because he's a dumb American, because all the other characters call him Luis, so I'll go with that. I really liked Luis as a character though, and I honestly wish he had more screen time. He had a fun, likable personality, but also had a lot to do with the Las Plagas parasite. He's definitely still in the game enough though, so that his death actually carries some weight, and gives Leon further motivation to put an end to Las Plagas. Ada is also in this game, who's been doing some more mysterious things in the past 6 years as well, as she's now working for one of the series' big bad Albert Wesker. Her motives are still a bit unclear and mysterious, but she does often go out of her way to save the damsel in distress Leon, and then she does her trademark save and dash where she saves Leon's life and feels no need to explain anything and then just dips out.
Maybe it's about time you told me the reason why you're here.
Maybe some other time.
Man, you love doing that, don't you?
Like I said in my review of the RE2 remake, I really like Ada as a character, and I think her dynamic with Leon is very interesting, so I really liked her role in Resident Evil 4. Her voice actress also did a phenomenal job. She has such a cool voice, like a lot of the characters in this game.
Leon. Long time no see.
And then of course Ashley, who's the whole reason Leon is in this mess in the first place, plays a large role in this game as well, and that role is to constantly be kidnapped. Seriously, she gets kidnapped more than MJ in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Though that's probably one of my few complaints with the story, is Ashley gets kidnapped way too much and is constantly a damsel in distress we gotta save, and it just gets really repetitive. As for her character, I really don't have too much to say about her. She's just that spoiled, bratty rich girl, which makes sense since she's the president's daughter and all, but it's not like you ever really get backstory or deep moments with her. Who knows, maybe the remake will expand upon her more. I will admit though, it was nice having a companion in one of these games, even if she does get kidnapped and scream, "Leon!" almost every 5 minutes. Although this scene at the end felt totally out of nowhere to me.
Some overtime.
What?
Sorry.
Oh, get rejected!
Somehow I knew you.
It gave me a good laugh to end the game on though. The main antagonist of this game is Lord Sadler, who started the religious cult Los Illuminados and controls Las Plagas. He's not some crazy, super in-depth villain with tons of motivation or some righteous purpose. He just wants control and to put the United States in its place. And sure, he's a pretty basic villain, but I think that's okay and actually kind of refreshing. Not every villain needs some extreme motivation or purpose. Some are just plain evil, and that works too, especially for video games. That's not to say intricate and complex antagonists aren't good either. I'm just saying sometimes simpler is better. I really enjoyed Krauser's role in this game as well, as he's working for Wesker like Ada and is a match for Leon in combat. That knife fight between the two of them was extremely well done. One of the better looking cutscenes in the game for sure, and it does a good job showing just how evenly matched Leon and Krauser are. Apparently they used to work together as well, since Krauser keeps calling Leon comrade, which again, I haven't played all the games, so I'm not sure if that was touched on before, but it's cool to know these two have a history and rivalry of sorts. Then there's that little annoying runt Salazar, whom you must chase around the castle for hours. Mr. Kennedy. Man, the voices in this game are so fun to imitate. He was a lot more goofy and comedic than intimidating, and definitely provided some of the funniest scenes in the game. Again, I think this story strikes a nice balance of being lighthearted and campy.
You got a smoke?
Got gum.
While also taking on a more serious, darker tone when it needs to. Overall, the story was just a fun adventure. I don't really think it added much to the overall plot of the Resident Evil series. None of the characters necessarily developed or changed a lot. Leon remains the same cool, calm, and collected badass throughout the entirety of the game, and we don't really learn too much about what he's been up to since Raccoon City, which can be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. Leon does feel like a different character to me since Resident Evil 2, and it's kind of hard to connect these two as the same guy sometimes, but also keeps a lot of mystery surrounding Leon and his character and how he's changed throughout the years. Despite him not having the most consistent plot line or writing throughout the games I've played so far, Leon is probably still my favorite character in the series thanks to his likable personality, one-liners, and complete badassery.
Hasta luego.
I'm really curious how they're going to portray him in the remake, because from what I've seen from the trailers, it looks like they might expand upon what he's been up to since Resident Evil 2, since it shows Leon actually meeting with President Graham, who wasn't in the original. Overall, Resident Evil 4's story isn't extremely deep, and it doesn't add a whole lot to the overall Resident Evil plot, but it's a fun, sometimes campy, sometimes scary adventure meant to be enjoyed and not taken too seriously. Separate Ways is a DLC released for Resident Evil 4 following the perspective of Ada Wong during the events of Resident Evil 4's story. It's pretty short, it's only about 3.5 hours, but it takes everything that was fun from the main game and lets you play as Ada instead. The merchant is present, of course, again, never being acknowledged or questioned by Ada. Is this guy a phantom or something? You get a lot of similar weapons for Ada that are already fully upgraded, as well as some new weapons like the bow gun. Ada also gets her own unique animations with the kicks and movement and all that to fit her own flamboyant and flashy style. The enemy types and bosses are the same as the main game as well. A lot of the locations are also the same. There's a few new areas, like the boat area with the turrets, which was a fun new area with some new level design. Ada also has a grappling hook she can occasionally use to scale different obstacles. It's not something you can use whenever you want, unfortunately. It's purely situational, but still cool they included that nonetheless. Like I said, the story is just the events played out from Ada's perspective as she enters the village looking for Luis Serra and the sample of Las Plagas she must retrieve for Albert Wesker. Even when seeing things from Ada's point of view, I'm still very confused about her motivations, because it seems she's helping Wesker, but she'll constantly disobey him and go out of her way to save Leon's dumbass multiple times. And while we're on the subject, I do think it's cool that this DLC explains a lot of the context around some of the random things that happened in the main game. For example, knowing it was actually Ada who rang the church bell at the beginning of the game to save Leon actually makes a lot of sense. In fact, there are multiple times where Ada will help or save Leon without him even realizing it. It's clear she still cares about Leon, but I still have no idea what exactly she and Wesker are up to. I'm sure I'll figure it out when I play more games in the series, but the story connects and weaves very well with Resident Evil 4's main story, and the DLC as a whole was very enjoyable. I wasn't sure if I should talk about mercenaries in this video, but I know a lot of people who played Resident Evil 4 really enjoy this mode, so I figured, why not? Mercenaries just allows you to go wild with that extremely satisfying gunplay against hordes of enemies in multiple maps. There are 4 maps in total, some are newly created specifically for mercenaries, while others like the village are from the main game. If you get a ranking of 4 stars, which you get by achieving a 30,000 score or higher, you unlock a new character to play as. has. There's Leon, Ada, Krauser, Wesker, and Hunk. Each has their own unique set of weapons and animations, which I thought was very cool. You can even use Krauser's transformed arm. It was also very cool of them to include Hunk and Wesker in the game as well, since they aren't actually present in the story. Well, Wesker's in the DLC, but you get my point. I really like how you're forced to choose to make a gamble and picking up more time and risking death and having to start over, or just playing it safe and extracting on the helicopter. On one of the maps, these massive chainsaw guys spawn after you survive for a while, and oh my goodness, they were absolutely brutal to go up against. Mercenaries is a very fun extra mode if you just want more of that great gunplay action from RE4, and has a decent progression system with scoring as well that you can put a decent amount of time into. This mode was very popular, which is why they brought it back in Resident Evil Village as well. Before trying Resident Evil 4, I didn't really understand what made so many people absolutely love it and claim it to be a masterpiece and possibly even one of the best games of all time. I'm proud to say, I get it now, guys. This game was so incredibly ahead of its time, it's ridiculous. With a fun, thrilling adventure for a story, extremely satisfying gameplay, iconic voices and characters, excellent level design, and masterful presentation, it's no doubt a fantastic game. It still holds up very well to this day. I definitely would recommend this game to those who haven't tried it yet. You can get it so cheap these days, it's an absolute steal. Honestly, I think this might be my favorite Resident Evil game, and keep in mind I played the newer ones first, so I'm really partial to those as well. I also really enjoyed the Resident Evil 2 remake, but I think Resident Evil 4 is actually the best to me, and I hate to just jump on the bandwagon, but it really is that good. I'm very excited to see what Capcom does for this remake. Now, I doubt no matter how good it is, it could ever beat the original for a lot of people, because you know, it's the original, but I'm hoping it can bring that atmosphere to modern graphics and modernize the gameplay a bit. Let me know if you want to see me make a similar video like this one for the remake when it comes out, and feel free to let me know down in the comments your thoughts on Resident Evil 4 if you've played it already. I hope you guys enjoyed this new style of video review I went for. I've been wanting to make longer, more in-depth reviews, so if you enjoyed this style, let me know in the comments and I'll keep doing this because I had a lot of fun making this video. If you enjoyed it, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you're new. I have memberships on the channel if you'd like to join for exclusive perks like shoutouts and getting to see my videos early. There's a link down in the description, or you can press the join button next to my channel. Special thanks to my mentors who have joined the channel recently. I really appreciate you guys. Other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, everyone.